I'm addicted to social media. And a year ago, I decided to leave. I want to tell you a little bit about what went into that decision and how I am able to approach social media now. Social media addiction is not technically considered a real addiction according to the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, according to the American Psychiatric Association. The way I'm going to be referring to addiction, though, is like by the definition of addiction, not necessarily the categorization of the mental disorder. I don't use the term lightly, but I am using it according to its definition, which is the harmful behavior of compulsively or chronically doing something. According to Anne Lemke, who is a Stanford medicine psychiatrist, she talks about the addictive potential of social media in this article by Bruce Goldman and in her book Dopamine Nation. She refers to how social media can be addictive and how it's something that is preying on sort of vulnerable people due to the dopamine rush that they're getting. The way I also refer to addiction throughout this video is similar to this Understanding Social Media Addiction, a Deep Dive, which is a journal article talking about the psychological factors and how mental health and low self-esteem affect people who become addicted to social media. There are many people, of course, who do not believe that social media is addictive, and there are even studies that prove that it's not. However, I'm going to be talking about my own personal experience and how I did find relief leaving social media and why I felt social media was addictive. I'm a professional artist, so the way I always approached social media my entire life was basically to establish my brand and share my artwork. I'm a millennial. I was a kid in the 90s and I grew up in the 2000s and 2010s with social media. The first website I really remember being on was DeviantArt when I was 14. And I joined it for the sole purpose of being able to share my art with people, especially with people who wanted to share fan art like I was making, so I could find a community of like-minded people. Then when I was 15, I joined Facebook, but that was more personal and a little bit different. And eventually, when I was 16, I got a Blogspot, and then I left Blogspot for Tumblr. And the cool thing about being on social media young and being a kid was I was willing to try things out and then leave them. When I got my DeviantArt, I built up my following. I had people who followed along with my art journey. And then when it wasn't really serving me, I was able to pivot to Blogspot when I found that that was the platform where more animation professionals were connecting and networking. And Blogspot was great. It was also different than DeviantArt. It didn't really have that internal platform. I had to find other people's bloggers and then follow them. And it also enabled me to learn how to write more on that platform. And then Blogspot sort of peaked and then dipped, and at that point people were moving to Tumblr and I left for Tumblr. Because I was able to join, build a following, and leave, I became really flexible with the idea that social media is not permanent. It's owned by these companies. These companies change their algorithms. People change what they want from social media, and social media platforms become popular and then change. I also experienced this really wild thing, which is when I had about, I don't remember which number it was either 16 or it was 20 followers on Blogspot. When I was in college, I put up these infographics that explained what happens when sharks disappear. There are 3 different infographics, like a triptych of infographics, and those infographics went viral. And virality in 2013 meant something different than virality now. Now virality can be a flash in the pan, but we know this from Vines and the fact that there are Vine compilations that are so popular on TikTok and YouTube. I experienced 20 teens virality, which is I was viral for weeks and months, and then it would go viral again. And these infographics traveled around the internet in ways that I could not have anticipated. Again, I had such a small following that I had no idea how they really reached that peak. And one of the emails I got, amongst all the many emails I got, was an editor in New York City asking me if I was interested in making these infographics into a children's book. She didn't give me a book deal. She offered me the opportunity to basically try to get a book deal. And so I got a literary agent. I was still in college. I graduated college. I got internships and a job in animation, and all of that eventually led to me getting a book deal for what would be my first book, If Sharks Disappeared, and then launching my children's book career. So my experience with the internet was not only flexible when I was young, but also it my internet career experienced this thing that was like the best thing you could try to experience, which is I went viral and then launched my career off of it. And because I experienced all these things while my brain was still developing, my first book came out before I was even 25. I also learned how to make social media like baked into my life. I checked it every day, and then I compulsively checked it all the time. And then I learned that you could get external validation and dopamine rushes from sharing things and experiencing virality. And even though when things got shared a lot or I got a lot of likes, I would get anxious, the anxiety and the dopamine felt really linked and it was exciting. So I experienced like good and bad, this sort of like compulsive checking and what I would call addiction, and then also like a career being launched. Because those things sort of went hand in hand, I believed that all the bad were worth the good. That the compulsive checking, the feeling like I needed to be online all the time were something that I needed in order to basically like have my career go. I also experienced the downside of then feeling like I needed that external validation and those likes because I thought that was good. I thought it felt good. And I also kind of used that to sort of like help pivot what I thought I liked about my art. And I started realizing kind of like slower over time how I didn't think that was really good for me. I started getting hints of it. And then when my first book, If Sharks Disappeared, came out, I learned that that book actually earned out its advance before it came out and hit bookshelves, meaning by the time it was published, it had already earned out the advance that I had been paid to make it, meaning that it was going to earn royalties on every single book sold in perpetuity until they take it out of print. Hopefully that never happens. I was so stressed when my first book came out. I did readings, I posted online constantly, I was chronically online, and I did all these things and it was so stressful because I thought I had to sell the book, and I thought it was like really on me to sell the book. I felt this intense pressure that I owned the sales in that way. And then the book earned out its advance before it was even out, meaning I had no impact on it. Later, when I was kind of mostly offline, I went to a talk by an agent. It was at an SCBWI conference, and she talked about how as an author and illustrator, you only have control of like 1,000 book sales. That it's really up to like marketing and other factors outside of your control, like Barnes & Noble even stocking your book, for your book to sell out its advance or make back a ton of money. And there are exceptions to that. She did, say that big virality and someone like Oprah blurbing your book could like totally change that. But for the most part, you only have control of 1,000 books. And like freeing myself of that worry, after already having confirmation I basically don't have control over it with If Sharks Disappeared sale records, I realized that every day that I invested in time and posting online, I was making, for the most part, free art that I was posting to share. As an author, almost everything I do is spec work. I have a certain amount of children's books out, but what you don't see is the fact that I'm also working on anywhere between 4 to 7 books on my own with my agent before those books are sold and make me money. So they are speculative, even though I am actively working on them, and even though I will make money eventually, I haven't made money while I'm working on them. The idea of making money is enticing through social media and something that when I was leaving Instagram didn't offer. So places like TikTok and YouTube make more sense because you can make a living. And that's sort of the quiet part that no one wants to say out loud. But the reality is, you can make a living doing creative things on different platforms in a way that many platforms didn't do, especially in the 20 teens. My followers peaked on Instagram at around 21,000 followers and on Twitter at around 16,000 followers. And once I peaked around like 2018, I felt like things started to go downhill. I used to be able to get hundreds and thousands of likes consistently on Instagram, and then I started being like only able to get like 40 likes. And so I was watching that at the same time that I was like, I don't think this matters. And what is this doing to my day? It's eating my time. I'm making free art. I could be using that time to actually work or be creative in other ways. I'm also looking for this external validation instead of looking internally at what I like to do and what I want to do. And it kind of culminated in this moment in 2019 where I was like, I don't think this is serving me the way I think it needs to for me to be investing this much time in it.
and I'm really struggling to get off of it. That's something that people don't like to talk about, that I'm really open about, especially when I talk to other people about like why I'm not really online, is I will compulsively check things all the time. I do have OCD. I have some obsessive, obviously, and compulsive behaviors, and I don't struggle with addiction in any other form, but I really do struggle with checking things online. And when I have Instagram on my phone, it's really an alarming thing to look up from your phone and hours have passed. The light's down and you did nothing but look at things that like ultimately don't matter and you don't even remember. And that like scrolling behavior was something that I was really alarmed by. I would find myself wasting hours of time in addition to making free art to post to not get many likes. And so in 2019, I kind of was like, I don't think this is serving me. I should pull back. I pulled back for like a week, left social media. No one knew, just left quietly. And when I came back, I noticed I would binge social media then. I would do the thing where I scrolled for hours, where I would look up and it was hours later. I didn't like that. I found it also really alarming that if I cut it out and then I would binge, it was like a really bad thing for me and for my mental health. And I was comparing myself to everyone else online when I would be in those moments, which was not fair to me. And it made it so I wasn't living authentically. I was more like living through the lens of what I thought other people wanted from me. So then I would take a month off and I would come back. And something I also noticed was like no one noticed when I was gone, which felt incredibly liberating. To feel like people just didn't care if I wasn't online was like, oh, I'm like not that big of a deal. And it's not that I thought I was. I just think it's really easy in the context of having a certain amount of followers and people wanting to hear from you and people DMing you and people asking you questions, that you start to feel like a self-inflated and overinflated self-importance. And when I left and no one noticed, actually one of my followers noticed, who I followed her. We mutually followed each other. She noticed. She was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine. But also I think I'm going to disappear again." And then I would take another month off and again, no one would notice. And I felt better. It freed up time from my day, freed up worries, freed up feeling like, oh, if I do this thing, I should take a picture and I should post it. Freed up this commodification of like my free time and my life that I didn't really like that was happening. And it made it so when I did make art, one, I didn't share it, and two, I kind of had to see if I liked it first before anyone else liked it. All of that factored into when 2020 happened. Some of my books got stalled. Obviously, many things happened that year and everyone was really affected. I was really affected in my own personal life, and I decided to like basically completely leave. Now, the thing is, no one knew that I had completely left social media from like 2020 to 2024. I wasn't online in the sense that it wasn't on my phone. When I would take these breaks, I would delete all the apps from my phone, and then on my computer was how I would check mostly. And when I did check on my computer, it was only in moments where apps that I used to block it wouldn't work. Self-Control is an app I use, Cold Turkey is an app I use, and I block websites so that I can't check them. So when those would free up, I would check again sometimes, but mostly I would just use apps that would post for me. They were hooked up to my accounts. I would schedule posts out and then I would post and then I wouldn't look at the likes. I wouldn't look at the comments. And it was a way to tell people, oh, hey, my book's come out. My book's about to come out. My book's out. And then I didn't have to worry about it. And I did that for several book launches. And it was great. I have dabbled in TikTok. I sometimes download it. I post on there and I've done that through those. But I also feel like that feels kind of different.
Denial is a river in Egypt.
But I do find that I will scroll TikTok forever. So I do make sure that I'm like not on my phone all the time with that. That brings us to 2024. I had a friend over, and because I wasn't online actively, he informed me about Meta's new AI policies. And you can imagine, as an artist and writer, professional artist and writer who makes a living through this, I am not a big proponent of AI. That AI algorithms are built off of the theft of other people's hard work, of their copywritten material. And I do have a lot of issue with people using them to be creative, when that's something I would argue we don't do nearly enough of anymore. Being creative is something that is so intrinsic to humanity and sacred to being human. And to use technology in that way to almost be creative for us is an issue, especially when it's built upon layers of theft. So I'm not a fan of AI. I'm definitely not a fan of AI artwork. And my friend told me about how Meta's new AI policies had leaked and they were going to scrape everyone's artwork, everyone's posts, and use that to feed their AI algorithm. I was immediate when I knew what I had to do. I was going to leave. I wasn't going to stay on these platforms. I don't need them to take my artwork and use it to feed algorithms. And if they already have, that's a real bummer because I wouldn't have consented to that. I decided in that moment, before they said they were going to take the artwork, I was going to pull everything. It took 2 days to pull everything off of Instagram. It was a really painstaking process. And I pulled my art off of my art page on Facebook too. And I went through and I really wiped my Facebook. And in those 2 days, it was kind of fun to reminisce about what social media used to be, about what Instagram used to be. All my art with the Valencia filter from 2012 was very interesting to look at as I deleted it. But it was such an easy decision for me to be like, this isn't even serving me. It hasn't served me for years. I basically haven't been on it for years, so I'm gonna leave. And I put up a post saying my newsletter is on Substack now, and you can find me on there. I make regular posts on there, which are posts to the Substack platform, but I do my best not to check the homepage because it does function sort of like Twitter, which is very exciting to my brain. And I do think sometimes that format brings out the worst in how I want to behave and not who I would identify as. So I do my best not to check Substack, and I treat it like a newsletter, but it is sort of like a social media platform now, and many people use it like that. But I posted on Instagram and I said, you can find me here. I posted on Twitter and I said, you can find me here, but I'm off. And I left. And it was really interesting doing that. It was a decision that I had no qualms about. It was a decision that I felt was unilaterally the right decision. I got many DMs from people that day that I did it because I shared that I was doing it, and then it took me 2 days to delete everything. So I was sort of checking for those 2 days. I got many DMs from people, my followers, my mutual internet friends, about how I shouldn't be leaving, about how that was the wrong decision, about how they had to stay for their brand, for their promotion of their work. And I've always felt that everyone should do what best serves them with the information they have in the moment. I was so active online for a long time. And then as I learned more about the way my brain works, about how I feel offline, about the sales of my own work, and the fact that social media, other than my first initial book stuff, kind of never got me work, I was like, this isn't serving me. But other people might feel differently. And even now, as I say that, I'm aware that many people might feel differently. And that is fine. But many people were DMing me, telling me I was making the wrong decision, which I found really interesting. And I also was able to look at it and be like, this just speaks to how these platforms make us think that we need them. And something I thought a lot as in that 48 hours, and I've had now a year to reflect on it, is how nothing is free. How we think that, and we thought that social media was this wonderful way to freely market ourselves online, especially as artists. It was wonderful to be able to freely market yourself and not have to pay into these $1,000 annuals that promote your work in these big booklets. That's how a lot of people did it for years. But nothing's free. That's sort of everything comes with a cost. And the cost of social media is you sharing more than maybe you want to share, you taking up a lot of your time, you posting your work for free when it took you time and labor, and a sacrifice of, for me, my mental health. So for me, it was a no-brainer to make this decision. And I think when I hear a lot of people justify it, I think about the fact that when we justify things like that, oftentimes it's because we're trying to tell ourselves, we're trying to rationalize something that we maybe already know. And one of those people in particular, I've thought a lot about because they were particularly aggressive to me in how they told me I was making the wrong choice. And now they're no longer on Instagram too. They left for the same reason. It just took them 8 more months, which is fine. But I could tell in that communication that they were working through their frustration with the fact that I was doing maybe something they wanted to do. That's the thing I think that's also frustrating to watch, is it's not free. And people sacrifice a lot of themselves to do this thing, and they don't necessarily need to. It won't always help their book sales. It won't always help them get more jobs, but it feels like it should because it's this promise of free promotion. So now I'm a year out, and I'm on Substack still, but I treat it like a newsletter. I've had a really rocky year, so I haven't posted in the consistency that I did last year, which is just sometimes what happens. But anytime I feel that obligation to post, especially when it's free content, I do consider about how I need to check that and reconsider that. And I have been dabbling in TikTok and YouTube, but I will say also, for me, I am a part-time art teacher. I love teaching. My books are mostly educational, and I found YouTube to be a fun way to flex my skills as someone who majored in animation, who majored in a film-based medium. It's a fun way for me to like flex my editing, get to do that as a creative part of my process. I also have no compulsion really to check YouTube as of now. But the second I do, and the second I feel obligation, I will look at that the way I've looked at all my social media in the past and try to be flexible about what that means. And with TikTok, I don't know, I'm just playing with it right now. But the second I scroll all day, it's out. So am I completely off of social media? Not completely. You can find me online, but I'm exactly where I want to be at the moment I want to be there. And when that changes, then I leave. Something too that is a big through line for me is the fact that like I make books. And for the most part, that's how I make a living. My books are physical mediums that we experience in the world. And teaching is a thing I do physically in the world, interacting with kids who are working with things physically. And the more I see social media and the internet change, the cheaper I think it makes art. It has devalued art. I would argue that's why art prices haven't improved and haven't stabilized and haven't adjusted for inflation so aggressively in the last like 20 years. But also, I think it cheapens our access to it, right? We see that with AI too. People think that it's free, that they have access to it, even though copyright says they don't. When I think about social media versus physical media versus interacting with people versus getting a magazine in the mail, or I think about Sunroom, which is a really cool monthly print we get in the mail. We get physical art prints in the mail each month. And I think about how I think that with the rise of AI and with the sort of like late stage social media moment we're in, especially with the like sort of late stage capitalism we're in, I think we're gonna go back. Everything's a pendulum, right? I think we're gonna go back a bit more to things in person. Books, prints, art, fine art. And when I look at like the art landscape, especially with social media tied in, I really believe things in person and things that feel tangibly ownable, things that feel like you can experience it without a camera watching, that's where I think we're going, which really excites me. It really excites me as someone who makes books too, because one of the most wonderful things about a book is that I don't need to necessarily sell 1 million books when my book comes out. It would be so cool too. My life would be set if that happened. But the wonderful thing about books is you can go to your grandparents' house and find a book they loved and take it off the shelf 50 years later, and it means something to you. And that's the thing I love about making books is I have no idea where they go. I have no idea who reads them. And when I find out sometimes who's reading them, a kid in Thailand, a kid in China, a kid who's reading the translated version in a country across the world that I have little to no interaction with in my daily life, that is the coolest thing. And while social media gave us sort of like a taste of that, and I can say I experienced that because when my work went viral in 2013, I got emails from people in Hong Kong and emails from people in Zimbabwe, and I connected with the world on this really large scale. I also think it's like not necessarily real. The communities we make can feel real, but there's nothing that compares to the stuff we've experienced in real life. So I think that things might be going back to being in person, but mostly I just wanted to share this. One, because I've been off of social media for a year, but two, because I think there's a pressure to be online when I don't think we have to. And if this video reaches one person that is able to recontextualize their social media usage, then that will be why I made it. You can find me here on YouTube, posting when I feel like it and not being burdened by it. And you can find me on Substack doing the same thing, which is my newsletter, and I put that out. I try to put it out weekly, but the last few months have been a little rocky, so that hasn't happened. You can also find my book at any bookstore or library in America and in countries like Germany, Italy, South Korea, and basically all over the world.